And what topics have they shown more interest in? What do they want to do? The kids that you're working with, the ones you're mentoring.
So the youth that I'm working with today, there's two types. There's the DACA and the ones born here.
Hmm.
So the DACAs are a little older. They're like in their 20s now, and they are. And then the other ones are the ones born in the South. So they speak English. They're bilingual. What they all carry with them is a very heavy burden of the fact that half of them, their parents are undocumented. So one of the things that we have here is that we have high, because of the first wave, we had for a while, for long enough for the kids to be imprinted with the trauma, we had very high concentrations of undocumented families, much more than in other places, just in general, right? Because remember, there was no one. So when somebody comes and half the population, 3/4 are undocumented, when there are zero, very few Latinos, suddenly it's a very high proportion. And so many of what they're interested in is, one is that they're trying to figure out how to tell their parents' stories because there's so much part of it. Remember, because there were no translators. I don't think this would ever happen in Los Angeles, but can you imagine a 6-year-old kid having to translate for the parents? That wouldn't happen in Los Angeles or Chicago or anywhere else because everybody's bilingual, but here there wasn't. And so these stories of, I think, of trauma, of trying to integrate themselves, of finding themselves, of exploring what does it mean to be a Latino Southerner, but not Texas. So again, you have to understand, this is not border, Tejano, Chicano, they don't really, these kids are growing up and they don't really, that's not their narrative framework. So it's very interesting. So what they're interested in, a lot of the times they don't really know it yet because they're discovering it because their surroundings are so new. So if you were in Los Angeles, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm trying to understand the Chicano culture and am I this and that and the farm workers or in the border, the tension between going back and forth between grandma that kind of things, these narratives for the youth today in the South, it's up for grabs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of interesting. It's not really clear exactly. And so they're trying to figure it out. And that's why it takes time to tell these stories because they're not obvious at all. They're not easily frameable as the Latino migrant experience in the US. That's the great challenge.
Mm-hmm. And well, you've been there for quite a few years yourself. How have you seen, your community change in this past year since you arrived? With the people arriving now, the people arriving back then. What have you seen?
So I'd like to use the word communities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important distinction. I try not to use the word Latino community.
Mm-hmm.
It's Latino communities. ¿Por qué? You have to understand it, right? But there's like how much? 36 countries. Oh, how many? 40, 50 languages are spoken and indigenous.
In Latin America?
Yeah, right. 36 in Latin America. No, but so my communities are like the Peruanos, Bolivianos, Venezolanos, Colombianos, and Mexico. And then Mexico, you got Michoacán, Oaxaca, Puebla, it's just the Guerrero. And then you got the Otomí, you've got the Chichimecas. I mean, it's like you got the Purépechas. This is, so there's also understanding that that also what we're living, this is what makes it so exciting, is that there is really because there were no preset also boundaries of, the Salvadorians live here in Los Angeles, South Central, and they kind of mix a little bit with, maybe the Salvadorians. And here in Durham, because there were in Durham, North Carolina, where I live, or in a lot of these places, there were no boundaries set. So there's a very interesting mix of Latin Americans who would never, ever before in their lives come together. There's no way that this person would have ever met unless they had come to the South, maybe. And so the changes that we see are, first of all, people are settling down in large quantities, right? They were able to buy homes even while being undocumented. They're working, they have in their labor are integral to the great transformation of the South in terms of economics. They have, in some places, they have radically transformed some of the communities in which you went from like 5% Latino to 50% Latino. And that's created a lot of tensions. But what's more important, though, is that finally now the youth that was born when the couples came. So what made a big difference in this migration is that people came with their wives or brought their wives very soon afterwards. Before it was just the man, el norteño, no? This is like the family. And so the kids who were born during the boom are now coming of age. And to me, that's the biggest transformation, is the coming of age of a new generation of Latinos, of Latino youth that is radically different. I mean, culturally, of course, they relate to each other through TikTok and mass media, pop culture. They have very similar references, Bad Bunny, Selena, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But on a deeper level of La Tierra, where they are, who they are, their stories, they're very, very different from anyone else. So to me, that's the greatest change that I've seen is, well, first of all, I have seen the whole thing, from zero to this thriving communities. And I would say what's the most fascinating part about this is how they're going to find, how we're trying to slowly make a home for ourselves. And the home can't just be consumption. Oh, we have a home, we can buy TV, we have una buena troca. But for me, it is also cultural expression, and that goes into public art and public storytelling. And to me, that's what I'm hoping. So when you ask me the changes that I've seen, the answer to me is the changes that I'm trying to see happen, that I think are necessary for us to be healthy, preserve our memory. And so what I see is the greatest challenges right now that we have is people have been running. Basically, this is how I would sort of explain to you in a way the evolution of our community. We came, it was like we were on the moon. It was alien, it was very different, but yet there was an echo to it in nature and in like the colonial structures that were there inset in terms of like, racial orders. We were running, we were always running. So we had very little time to think about why we were here ultimately and we were just trying to get our children something better. And now finally the community has stopped running. And this stopping of the running, you know how it is when you run and then you stop running, you start sweating a lot and it gets really hot. And then you start also asking yourself questions. Oh, I haven't seen my mother in 20 years. Because if I go back, I can't go back, which is the Bulls and Saints issue of reverse migration. Was it worth it? Why did I do this? And you start asking yourself deep questions about belonging. And you turn to your children and suddenly your children are not speaking Spanish as well as you wish they did because you have two jobs and you've been super busy and now they started losing their traditions. And so now you have to work with them. So it's a very interesting moment right now, a key moment in which I tell everyone that in the next 5 years, we need to be very much aware of creating institutions that are culturally representative of us, be aware of archival memory, because 50 years from now, like I said, if we don't do this intentionally, we're going to disappear. We would have been assimilated. And I don't think that's what we want. And I don't think that's good for America in general, right? And so it has this sort of capacity of the migration of immigrants to sort of renew. You talk about America has this dynamic because of its migrant history, immigration history, that renews its sense of meaning, of belonging, of what it means to be an American. And I think right now, looking towards the 250th anniversary of the U.S. independence and trying to understanding of what happened in the last 50 years, which is gigantic changes, demographically speaking and politically, and what's going to happen in the next 50, I believe that the South and the Latino South, the Nuevo South, is going to play a crucial role in determining, I think, the future, one of the main narratives of what America is and will be in the next 50 years.
I see. I have just two more questions for you.
Vale.
The first one is, what is a question about the documentary that you haven't been asked that you wish someone had? if there is one.
Mm-hmm. Um, how long did it take me before I got hit by a bull?
Okay, that's a good one. And how much did it hurt?
And how much did it hurt? Yes. How long did it take? It took me till the end, which is really good. So right about as that we were finishing editing the film, I got hit by a bull in Chiran. I got stomped by a bull that was half loose and while we were filming the second part, but still editing. And yeah, that was really intense. And I'd never gotten. I mean, I gotten showered with bullshit, literally, and pee, and literally bullshit. Right? It's not like not a bad word. It's literally it's bull poop
Mhm.
flying, pee and sweat, sometimes blood. But I'd never really gotten like charged and
Mhm.
hit and like boom flew, and then I flew into a post and almost like destroyed my face. But it was good. I worked it out. It was
Okay, yeah.
that was good. And so now that I know, I'm much more careful. I mean, 7
Uh-huh.
years I've been very careful. But I was joking, saying, "Oh, okay, now I can get closer to a bull because now I know a little more."
You know what it feels like.
As
Yeah.
opposed to like, "Oh, now you're going to be careful." I said, "Yeah, well, yes, but also I want to be closer." That's
Mhm.
where the action is. And the closer you can get to the bull, I don't like going to wars. I don't like filming pain and misery. I understand the feeling of the adrenaline, and so for me,
Mhm.
the closest thing would be bull riding.
Yeah, and one could argue that it was an initiation, right, that you had to
Yes.
go through as well.
Um, for me, one of the main takeaways in doing this film and in doing it in such a way, in the way that I did, and the way I edited it, and the way that I told the story, and the story told itself, was that I want people to sort of have a experience of the Latino migration that is outside of the major headlines of what I would call sort of trauma and victimization, right? So deportations and the kids in cages, which are important and necessary because they're real, they're true, but oftentimes they sort of reduce us to victims, and they minimize the richness of our experience and the richness of our capacity for dignity, our capacity for cultural empowerment, and our capacity to be protagonists, right? And so it's the complications of the narrative created by a movie like El Norte, right? Which is very powerful, very true, but there's got to be other ones that counter that, and we're sort of oftentimes, I think, caught still in that narrative of El Norte. And with that in mind, I wanted to create the experience not only of showing the cultural richness of these communities who've come to the South with nothing, and they've created something amazing, and they've been able to create these traditions and perpetuate them and transmit them. To me, these are examples for other communities of Latinos that may have been more assimilated, that are sort of añorando, right? They're like longing for like second or third generations do, for the loss of certain traditions, the idea of assimilation, right? And so this is an example that, yes, it can be done. It takes work, it takes community, and it takes commitments to, doing the work, right? And the other part of that then is, of course, the idea of the fact that many people don't understand that there's a lot of folks who have come here, they work hard, they contribute, and that they in many ways want to go home. That they do want to go home. That the capitalist American dream is not the dream is not the American dream. The dream is to better yourself, to become a better human being, to give your children what they need, to be able to take ownership of your life, and then you take that, and then you choose to either stay or you go home. And some people would like to be able to go home, so that they can actually come back and see their grandchildren and see their children. And to me, that's one of the greatest takeaways is that, oh, you want migration reform? You want people to, like, you have issues with migrants? Well, the best way to deal with your sort of negative view of them is to give them actually papers. You know, it's kind of ironic. It's like, oh, you don't like them. You only want them there to cut your grass, but you don't want them to buy a home across the street and inundate your schools. Well, many of them, you know, if you give them papers, they would actually go away. They'd be very happy to go away. And then you would have more room for whatever you want to do. So in a way, it's kind of ironic and sad that would be one way of approaching the issue. But if that's what it takes, I would say you want to be rational about it, go ahead and give them papers. And then they will go home. It's kind of like a trick thing because they will come back. But hopefully maybe the people won't be thinking it that deeply, and maybe we can in some way get this done.